It started on an ordinary morning, one of those days when the world just hums along, oblivious to the forces beneath its surface. The sky was the same dull gray. People sipped their coffees in the same routines, and no one expected that something unseen was already unraveling the threads of normalcy. But for Ethan Marlowe, this day was about to become the fulcrum on which his entire existence would pivot. Ethan, 37, was a financial analyst in Chicago, precision-driven, logic-bound, and utterly skeptical of anything he couldn't quantify. He didn't believe in divine signs or whispers from above. His life was neatly arranged in spreadsheets, forecasts, and quarterly returns. He had success but no purpose, money but no meaning, and in the echo of his luxurious high-rise condo, silence screamed louder than any applause he ever earned. That morning his phone buzzed, a notification from his banking app. He barely glanced at it, assuming it was another update on a market fluctuation. But when he opened it, his thumb froze mid-scroll. Incoming transfer, $1 billion, memo, payment to God. His breath caught. He stared, blinked, refreshed the screen. It was still there. He tried to laugh. Maybe a glitch. Maybe a prank. But deep inside, something turned cold. The memo felt intentional, not a joke or an error. Payment to God. From who? Why him? He scrambled to contact the bank, but the line rang endlessly. The customer portal? Offline. His heart raced. His palms grew damp. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan walked out the balcony and looked over the city's neon glow. A question gnawed at his mind. Why him? The next day, Ethan received an email from an address that wasn't just untraceable. It looked ancient. The sender's domain wasn't from Earth. It simply read, Edenet. Subject. The transaction has been confirmed. The reckoning begins. He clicked the body of the email, and a simple line blinked. He who received the gift must pay the price. He slammed his laptop shut, a chill crawling up his spine. For the next 48 hours, Ethan watched as everything he knew twisted into a surreal nightmare. His bank account was frozen. Every trace of the billion-dollar deposit vanished. And then the phone call started. But they weren't from numbers. They were from names. Names like Messenger, The Witness, Gabriel, Department of Collections. Each time he picked up, all he heard was the sound of wings, flapping in slow, thunderous patterns. Then silence. Then a whisper. Return the value or give your soul. On the third night, he didn't sleep. He couldn't, because that's when the visitor arrived. Ethan was jolted awake at 3:03 a.m. by a creaking sound from his living room. He reached for his phone, but the screen was black, powerless. Even the city lights outside had vanished. There was only fog and a hollow, low hum, like a choir mourning in reverse. He stepped out cautiously, and there, standing in the center of his living room, was a man dressed in all white, except his suit shimmered like it was woven from moonlight. His eyes weren't eyes. They were galaxies. He didn't speak. He simply extended a hand and placed a small object on Ethan's coffee table. A coin. It bore no country, no date, just a symbol, a heart split by a sword. The man finally spoke, but not aloud. It was inside Ethan's head. You've been chosen as a conduit. $1 billion was offered not to buy, but to awaken. This is not a joke. You must find the worth of what you never valued. Ethan blinked, and the man vanished. The coin remained. Desperate for answers, Ethan began researching everything. Biblical symbols, ancient currencies, esoteric theology. He found scattered references to divine payments, offerings that were never about wealth, but about will. Sacrifices made to move heaven. But what if someone, a real someone, had somehow made a payment to awaken God? What if that someone needed Ethan to deliver a message? What if this wasn't about him at all? Ethan's world shifted. His mind began unraveling the layers of his own life. He realized how long he'd been numb, how far he'd drifted from any sense of calling. Maybe the $1 billion wasn't a blessing or a curse. Maybe it was a mirror. He started seeing people differently. The homeless man he passed every day without a glance? Ethan now stopped, offered help, asked a story, and the man looked him dead in the eye and whispered, You carry the coin, don't you? Ethan recoiled. What did you say? The man smiled, revealing worn teeth and ancient wisdom. The billion was never currency. It was weight, and now you carry it. Ethan stumbled back. Who are you? The man simply said, a receipt for what was already paid. That night, Ethan's dreams turned darker. He was walking through a cathedral of mirrors. Each reflection showed not himself, but a version of who he could have been. A surgeon saving lives, a teacher inspiring the broken, a father holding a daughter. Every mirror cracked as he passed, whispering, this is what the payment was for. He woke up screaming. The next morning, a package arrived at his door. No postage, no markings. Inside was a letter, handwritten. This is your countdown. You have 30 days to repay the worth in action. Every second, the weight increases. You cannot run. You cannot transfer. You must live it. Ethan's world became a spiral of urgent charity, desperate introspection, and confronting his own hollowness. He sold his car, gave away his condo, traveled to hospitals, shelters, schools. But every act of kindness he gave felt like water into an endless well. Not enough. Never enough. On day 10, he received another letter. 10 days down. The scale tips. Judgment nears. But alongside it was a photo. A young girl, 6 years old, smiling, but in a hospital bed. She held a drawing. It was a coin with a heart, split by a sword. Ethan had never seen her before, yet she knew the symbol. The tension built. He knew now this wasn't just some divine prank. This was a test, not just of faith, but of purpose. Who paid that billion? Why him? Why now? And what would happen if he failed? He traveled to the hospital in the photo. The girl, Amara, was real. And when he entered her room, she looked up and said, I've been waiting for you. The man in white told me you were coming. Ethan's knees buckled. Amara took his hand and said, with a wisdom no child should possess, you're not here to save me. I'm here to save you. God doesn't want your money. He wants your mission. The hospital room was quiet, eerily quiet, the kind that made your heartbeat sound louder than it should. Ethan sat beside Amara, still unsure if this was a dream, a spiritual assignment, or the unraveling of his sanity. Her small hand wrapped around his with unnatural calm. She didn't tremble. She didn't fear. If anything, he was the one shaking. How do you know me? He asked her. Amara tilted her head. I don't know you, but the man in white said I'd recognize you by the coin. Ethan pulled the strange coin from his pocket. The heart split by a sword shimmered faintly under the hospital lights. She nodded. That's the one. That's the price. But not the payment. He blinked, confused. What's the difference? Amara looked at him, and her gaze, wide and ageless, felt like it carried centuries. The payment was made to wake you up. The price is what you're willing to give to keep others from falling asleep. That night, as he walked back to the cheap motel he'd rented after giving up his condo, Ethan felt more awake than he ever had, not in a caffeinated, anxious way, but like a man who'd been underwater for years and had finally surfaced. The city lights didn't distract him. The noise didn't irritate him. Everything felt like it mattered. Every person he passed on the street could be part of the message. And that's when he saw her, an older woman, standing alone at the intersection near the train tracks, dressed in black, but holding flowers, red roses, bundled tightly, yet wilting in the cold. He stopped. Something about her pulled at him. Are you okay, ma'am? He asked. She looked up, startled, then nodded too quickly. Yes, just remembering. Ethan hesitated. May I ask what the flowers for? She didn't answer for a long time. Then, they're for the ones who never got to say goodbye. My son, my husband, both gone, and I never told them how much they meant to me. She looked up at the sky, as if it might give her the words. I just keep wondering, what's the value of words not said? That line echoed in Ethan's mind all night. What's the value of words not said? He started writing letters. Not emails, not texts. Handwritten letters. To people he'd hurt, neglected, ignored, Letters to himself. Letters to the boy he once was. To the man he could be. He dropped them in mailboxes without knowing if they'd even be read. But that wasn't the point. The act itself was part of the repayment. On day 15, Ethan returned to the hospital to visit Amara. Her condition had worsened. Tubes and machines surrounded her, but she still smiled like she had the sun inside her. She handed him a notebook. "I've been drawing while I wait." He flipped through it, stunned. Every page showed visions, metaphorical, surreal images of him surrounded by fire, by wings, by shadows and scales tipping the balance. And one picture stopped him cold. It was the coin, but in the drawing it was cracking, splitting open like a seed. Inside was a tree, roots digging deep, branches reaching high. "What does this mean?" he asked. Amara whispered. "It means it's growing. You're growing." But it wasn't enough. Each time Ethan tried to do something good, volunteer at shelters, fund surgeries, help strangers, it felt like he was still behind, like the weight of the billion-dollar deposit was never truly lessening. And then the letters resumed, not from people, from something else. Each one came in the same format. Red wax seal, black envelope, no return address. Inside, always a countdown. 15 days remain. The measure is not money. It is meaning. 10 days. Souls touched, 431. Target, 10,000. 7 days. Scale tipping. The burden grows. It became clear. This was not about one great deed. It was about multiplication. Ethan had to become a catalyst. He couldn't do it all himself. He had to awaken others. He changed his approach. He began speaking in parks, churches, abandoned buildings, not as a preacher, but as a witness. He told his story. He held up the coin. Some called him crazy. Others cried. A few followed him. One was a man named Jacob, a recovering addict who'd lost everything but hope. Jacob had listened quietly as Ethan spoke under a freeway bridge to a group of homeless wanderers. When the others drifted away, Jacob approached and said, "I don't know why I believe you, but I do. If you need help spreading whatever this is, I'm in." Jacob became the first multiplier. Then came more. A woman named Lena who'd survived cancer. A teen named Marco who'd nearly taken his life the week before. A retired teacher. A grief counselor. Ethan's story sparked something. Not religion. Resonance. On day 20, Ethan woke to a letter slipped under his motel door. It wasn't black. It was gold. He opened it, trembling. "You have triggered a ripple." 5,000 hearts stirred. But the scale still tips. God doesn't need repayment. He needs restoration. You must go back to where you were broken. He knew exactly where that was. Ethan hadn't spoken to his father in 12 years. Their last argument had ended with fists pounding on a dinner table and silence louder than any apology. Ethan blamed him for everything, his coldness, his absence, the way he taught Ethan that love was earned, not given. But the coin burned hot in his pocket now. And the weight? It pulled him home. He found his father living alone in a run-down cabin in Indiana. The man looked older, smaller, but his eyes still held that granite hardness. Ethan walked in uninvited, heart racing. "What the hell are you doing here?" his father asked. Ethan held up the coin. "I came to pay something I owed. And it's not money." His father didn't understand. Didn't need to. Ethan just talked. And for the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend. He just confessed. Told the truth. His regrets. His fears. The hollowness. He said, "I hated you, but I just wanted you to see me." His father cried and hugged him, and it was the most valuable thing Ethan had ever received. On day 25, Amara slipped into a coma. Ethan sat at her bedside every night, coin in hand, praying, though he didn't know how. He just spoke, not to God, but to purpose, to something deeper. He said, "If I have to give up my life for hers, I will." And that night, the man in white returned. Same suit, same eyes like galaxies. "You have done much, Ethan Marlowe. But the transaction is not over. What more do I have to do?" Ethan asked. The man placed a hand on Ethan's chest. "Die. not in body, but in ego. You must give the final piece. And he handed Ethan a mirror. Inside the mirror, Ethan didn't see himself. He saw every person he had ever ignored, every soul he had walked past, every moment he could have made someone feel seen and didn't. The weight hit him all at once. This was the billion, the value of a life unlived. And Ethan wept, not out of fear, but clarity. The next morning, Amara woke up. The doctors had no explanation. The tumor? Shrinking. The infection? Vanished. She looked at Ethan and said, "It's been paid. The message is delivered." The morning after Amara woke up, Ethan stood at the hospital window, staring out at the gray skyline that once felt like a cage. But something had shifted, not just in her, in him. The air felt different, as if the world itself had inhaled for the first time in ages. Behind him, the steady rhythm of machines tracked Amara's healing pulse, quiet but persistent. Doctors called it a miracle. Nurses whispered it like gossip. But Ethan knew it wasn't about science. It was something deeper. The billion-dollar payment had never been about money. It was a contract, one not written in ink, but in transformation. But the coin still burned in his pocket. The final act wasn't done. Later that day, he received another letter. This one wasn't sealed. It was open, folded like a casual note you'd leave on a kitchen table. The transaction nears completion. One task remains. The payment must be transferred. The next soul must carry the message. Ethan didn't understand. Transfer it? Hadn't he been chosen? Wasn't this his burden? But in his gut he knew he was never meant to carry the weight forever. He was only meant to awaken. He looked over to Mara, now sitting upright and coloring peacefully, unaware of the storm she had unknowingly calmed. And just as he was about to leave her room, she spoke softly without turning. "You know it's not me, right? I already carried my part." He froze. She looked at him with those infinite child eyes again. "The next one is someone you've already met, but you didn't see them." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He wandered through the city, like a ghost retracing old steps. He passed the same bridge where he had first met Jacob, the former addict who had since become a local hero, organizing food drives and housing efforts. Then the shelter where Lena counseled abuse survivors. The abandoned warehouse where Marco, the teen who once nearly took his life, now taught free music lessons to kids. Each one had multiplied the message, but none of them were the next carrier. Ethan kept walking until he found himself outside a dark alley. There, huddled between garbage bins and graffiti-covered walls, was a man Ethan had seen before but ignored. Every day for 3 years on his way to the office. Old, ragged, bearded, always muttering to himself. This time, Ethan didn't look away. He approached. "Sir." The man looked up with vacant eyes. But then they focused. "I was wondering when you come back around," the man said. Ethan blinked. "Do I know you?" The man coughed a laugh. "You passed me like I was furniture every day for years. But I knew you. Knew you'd get the coin. Knew you'd come here with that look in your eye. Like you're about to hand off a ticking bomb." Ethan pulled the coin from his pocket. "It's not a bomb," he said. The man looked at it and smiled. "No, it's a seed. One planted in pain, watered in purpose. But it ain't meant to grow in just one garden." Ethan kneeled and placed the coin in the man's hands. "Then it's yours now." The moment the coin touched his skin, something changed. The air tightened. Time felt slower. The street lamp above them flickered once, then held steady, casting an otherworldly glow of the two of them. The man, suddenly no longer frail, sat straighter. His voice deepened. "You completed the contract, Ethan Marlowe. The payment has been made. The message has been delivered. The burden has been multiplied. Now," he placed his hand over Ethan's heart, "now you are free." The following days felt surreal. No more letters. No more visions. No more man in white. Just peace. Ethan started working, not in finance, but with people. He founded an organization called the Worth Exchange, where people shared their stories, time, skills, and love instead of currency. People showed up. A lot of them. Jacob became a board member. Lena ran the trauma wing. Marco taught classes. Amara, now healthier than ever, visited every month and painted murals across the building. Ethan no longer tried to pay back the billion. He lived as if every moment was worth that much. And then, 1 year later, on a cool spring morning, he got a single envelope in the mail. This time it was white. Inside was a blank card, except for one sentence. Someone else has just made a very large payment to God. And taped inside the card was another coin, fresh, unblemished, same symbol, a heart split by a sword. Conclusion. And so the message lives on. It was never about the money, never about a debt in numbers. It was about awakening. We walk past people every day. People carrying silent wars, invisible weights, messages from something greater than ourselves. And we ignore them until something shakes us awake. The $1 billion payment was a metaphor, a jolt from the divine to remind us. The currency that moves heaven is not cash, it's compassion. It's the child you notice, the apology you finally give, the stranger you choose to help without expecting anything in return. Ethan's story reminds us, you don't have to wait for a miracle. You already are one. And maybe, just maybe if you're reading this, the next payment is yours. 1 year passed, and the world didn't end. No great judgment fell from the sky. No thunderous voice declared a cosmic debt fulfilled. But for those who've been touched by the ripple Ethan started, the world did end and a new one began. A quieter one, more awake, more alive. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the card, the final white envelope. Someone else has just made a very large payment to God. Who was it? Why now? And what was he supposed to do? He kept the second coin in a small glass case on his desk at the Worth Exchange. Unlike the first, it never grew warm, never shimmered. It simply sat there, silent, heavy, waiting. Then one night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., Ethan was woken by a voice. Not a loud one, just a whisper. But it wasn't from his room. It was from inside his chest. You must return to where the first stone was thrown. He sat up, heart racing. He knew exactly what that meant. The train station. The station had long been abandoned, flooded with graffiti, rusted tracks, and broken turnstiles. But the air still held the echo of the night. He first saw the digital billboard flash. Be careful, this is not a joke. He stood in the same spot. Everything was silent, until the monitor flickered back to life, and the words reappeared. Be careful, this is not a joke. The new words scrolled in. You must watch what happens when you're not the one carrying the weight. Ethan turned as footsteps echoed behind him. A girl, no more than 16, stood in the shadows. Messy hair, torn backpack, eyes hollow like she hadn't slept in days. She held out a coin. His coin, but not the second one. The first one. He gasped. How did you get that? She shook her head. I woke up with it in my hand. No note, just this burning in my chest, like something was screaming without making a sound. She stepped closer. I've seen things since. People's pain, not just what they show, but what they bury. It's like, I carry it. Ethan dropped to his knees. It's starting again. Over the next few weeks, the girl, her name was Mila, became part of the exchange. She didn't speak much, but when she did, people listened, not because she demanded attention, but because her eyes saw them. One day, she asked Ethan, did you ever feel like you were dying before you ever lived? He knew exactly what she meant. The coin didn't just mark a mission. It resurrected the soul. Then came the warning. A red envelope. No return address. Ethan's name on the front. Inside a single phrase, the message is no longer optional. Silence now carries a cost. He showed Mila. She didn't flinch. Instead, she said something that made the air go still. Then let's stop whispering. That month, the Worth Exchange launched a campaign that would change everything. They didn't ask for money. They asked for truth. Hashtag My Message to God became a viral phenomenon. People around the world posted handwritten letters, voice notes, and short videos. Not prayers, not demands. Confessions from atheists, from believers. from people who had been broken so long they didn't even know what hope felt like. And Ethan, he posted the story. All of it. The billboard, the coin, the payments, the contracts, Amara, Jacob, Mila, the messages. And when he was done, he said, "If this is all a hallucination, then let me be mad forever, because nothing I imagined in my old life ever felt this real." Then came the broadcast. A major network picked up the story. And suddenly, the whole world was watching. Debate exploded. Was it a cult? A psychological experiment? A divine event? It didn't matter, because the message was already out. The ripple became a wave. And then, a tidal shift. Mila disappeared on a Tuesday. She left behind a note and a package. The note read, "The coin must keep moving. Don't come looking for me. This isn't about me. It never was." Inside the package, a new coin, but this one was cracked, down the middle. When Ethan touched it, a vision burst into his mind like lightning across a dark sky. A chain, thousands of people, each holding a coin. Each coin different, cracked, bent, gold, rusted, but connected. Each person staring forward at something blinding. Not a man, not a god, just a mirror, showing them who they could have been and still could be. And Ethan finally understood. The payment was never made to God for forgiveness. It was made to humanity for remembrance, to remind us of the cost of sleepwalking through life, to jolt the soul awake, to echo through one voice into 1,000 more, and eventually into yours. Conclusion: maybe someone did make a very large payment to God. Maybe it wasn't with gold, or diamonds, or blood. Maybe it was made with regret, with time, with a final breath whispered by someone who didn't want to die with their story still inside them. And maybe that payment was made for you, so that you wouldn't miss your moment, so that you wouldn't waste your chance, so that you wouldn't carry your brilliance to the grave, wrapped in silence. Be careful. This is not a joke. The next coin might be in your pocket.